Is there a dead zone of photography pricing? I hear this a lot, this dreaded dead zone title. And it's this idea that basically you're right between two different markets and you don't, with your pricing, fit into either one of them. So think of it as you're too expensive for the cheap clients and you're too cheap for the expensive clients. Does this even exist? Let's unpack that, because my answer to you would honestly be so nuanced. It would be, no, I don't think it does exist, but also, yes, I think it could exist. Okay. So instead of just giving you that fluffy, yes, there is, but I also want to give you a way of thinking about things. And I want to give you a little bit more deep of an answer of the psychology of money behind a lot of the price points you see in the photography industry by and large. I'm going to be using some generalizations as I teach this. I know it's not going to maybe apply to every specific person's nuanced situation, but listen, I'm going to try my best to give you what I believe is in the industry by and large. Yes, in a generalization. And so here's the three different parts of this episode that we're going to cover. The first is going to be an overview of some pricing psychology. And I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I want to make you think. I want to make you think about what is behind price points and behind numbers that we see as prices, because it's deeper than just the digits themselves. Second thing I want to talk about is the zones of photographers' pricing. So in this specific zone, from this 1,000 to this 1,000 for a wedding, what does that say about that client? I want to talk about what type of client sits in each bucket of photography pricing by and large. And then the third thing I want to talk about is, after we've covered those two, I actually want to talk about, is there a dead zone for photographers pricing? And if you're in it, how to get out of it. So the first thing I want to talk about is some pricing psychology. All right. So when you think about pricing, money psychology is that price is never just price. It communicates something way more than just the money that that digit represents. Okay. So for example, have you ever heard of a Cartier watch or a Rolex watch? When you look up, let's say, a Cartier watch, you'll maybe find that the price point for any given one is maybe around $10,000. Let's just say $10,000. Now, when you see that price point on a watch, the number is not the only thing that is running through your mind when you see that watch. The $10,000, the 10,000 bills of individual dollars is not the only thing. In fact, I'd say that's probably not even one of the first things that you think about when you see that $10,000 price point on that watch. Here's what normally runs through people's heads when they see that price point. Here's what they're thinking. They're thinking status. They're thinking exclusivity. They're thinking maybe that's way too expensive, or that's way overpriced for a watch. Some people are thinking that's way underpriced, depending on who you talk to. You know, you think of all the things that maybe you have to sacrifice to get a watch like that, to spend money to actually receive, to be able to afford that. Maybe all the hard work that you'd have to do to afford that. Maybe the reasons why this watch is or is not worth it. There's probably a level of implied quality to the watch if it's $10,000 in the price point. Maybe even it comes with a community. Like if you think about, like, Rolex watches definitely have a community. If you're wearing a Rolex watch and you come across someone else with a Rolex watch, you could start up a conversation just from like, hey, like, you're wearing one too. Like, where'd you get yours from? How long have you had it? Like, what's the model? Whatever have you. Maybe you look at that $10,000 price point and you have this craving, this inner craving, because maybe you can't afford it. And so, I want what I can't have. Maybe there's a goal in your head. And if you ever achieve that goal, you would say, I'd want to get that as like a reward for myself. Or maybe you have a feeling of, that watch would look so good on me, right? So I'm going down all the list of different things that are spinning through maybe anybody's mind on a given afternoon when they see that $10,000 price point on the watch. So it's financial. Yes, that number is financial, of course. But it's a physical thing. There's physical qualities to that price point. That price is emotional. That price is philosophical. That price is maybe even communal, brings community. Like I said, maybe that price is simple marketing. Maybe that price brings in a certain type of clientele. Maybe that price is just branding. It communicates a certain thing about the brand and that's positioning itself in a certain place in the market. Maybe it's a sales tactic of you can't have it, or it's so frustratingly expensive that you just want it, right? So on and so forth. All this to say, it's not just a price. It never is just a price. Pricing is never just about the financial repercussions, the money, the digits of it. Okay. Let me give you another frame to think about pricing psychology and money psychology. And my point in all this is just to make you think, to expand your horizons on what you think about money. So I remember I stopped thinking like an average photographer when I realized this about pricing. So, for example, what if somebody was making, let's say, $50,000 a year in their salary and they have normal life, bills, expenses? Would they buy, let's say, a $100 entree at a nice restaurant every single week on a routine basis? Or would that feel kind of expensive for them? Or would that feel reckless for them? Or would that be hard to justify? Probably yes to all of those things, right? $100 per week spent on an entree at some restaurant, that's like $5,200 per year. That's over 10% of their take home income for the year. So, what would be more realistic for this person to actually be spending? Maybe $10 per meal per week. Think like Chipotle, going out to Chipotle once per week, right? That's more like 520 per year. So it's like right around like maybe like 1% of their income. Now, take somebody that's making $500,000 per year. Would they buy a $100 entree every week on a routine basis? Would that feel expensive for them? Would that feel reckless for them? Hard to justify? Probably not. And why do we think that? Because that same $5,200, $5,200 per year is what? Just about 1% of their income. So think about it this way. It's the same exact percentage between those two different people, but here's the flip. For the $50,000 earner, $10 meals are the safe choice. For the $500,000 earner, $100 meals are also the safe choice. So, in proportion to income, the $100 entree is just as cheap to the higher earner as the $10 meal Chipotle is to the lower earner. Different price points, same relative cost. And exactly that is why it might feel expensive to one person at one price point, but it feels completely normal to another person at the exact same price point. Or in many cases, sometimes it's even cheaper to the other person. Think of someone making $1 million per year and $100 entree. What would that be to them? And so as a photographer, I realized when I realized this type of a narrative, I was pitching prices to clients that even though it would have been expensive for me to hire a photographer at that point in my life for a price point like that, it was cheap for them to hire me for that price point to them. So you have to remember how much money is flowing through a wedding normally. Like, yes, you've got the couple, especially if they are professionals, maybe they got dual income, maybe let's say like they're in their 30s or above 30s. Like those type of people, a lot of times they've got money, folks. Like they've got money flowing. And then you got to think about like the parents likely involved in paying the expenses. I mean, unless they're completely out of that child's life, maybe you got both sets of parents, same thing. So you got like, okay, one side of the family, the other side of the family, and the couple. Think about grandparents. A lot of grandparents contribute to things like weddings, different things like that. And so I was in this place where, as a photographer, I would pitch this measly number, and then I would I would show up to the parents' house on the day of the wedding, like where they're getting married or whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm showing up to this house of these parents who were the ones that paid me, and this house is nowhere less than like $5 million. Like, there's no way, and it was probably their second or third residence. And I pitched them like this measly little price, thinking it was too expensive for them. Right. So I go into more of this in my business blueprint in my coaching program. We dive into a lot of these money psychology things. This is just a preview, kind of more like a tip of the iceberg of what we can talk about when it comes to pricing psychology. But the biggest thing here is I need you to fundamentally expand your view of money past what you believe in your own life and what you've seen in your own life and your own experience and your own income levels and different things like that, because there's so much more about money psychology and pricing psychology that we do not see at face value, especially given if we've only had our own life experiences, right? Pricing is not just a number. It is a thesis statement on who you serve, the quality of your work. It's a psychological attraction or detraction tool. It is a positioning mechanism. It is a communication vehicle. It is so many things beyond just prices and digits, which this all leads us to the second thing that I want to tackle, which is zones of photography pricing. Now, when I talk about these zones of photography pricing, I'm going to kind of break down like what type of client is basically putting this much down for a wedding photographer, okay? These are not hard, fast rules. There are exceptions, absolutely. There's different states, there's different cities, there's different cultures, there's different countries. Heck, there's different currencies, okay? But I'm going to give you a couple generalizations normally in US dollar for I'd say the vast majority of photographers. Again, I know there's like a lot of cases where like the US dollar is completely different than in other countries, and that's totally fine. And I can't cover every single country in the world, but I'm going to cover what I see, especially in terms of US dollar. Okay. First zone of photography clients I want to talk about. This is what I like to call the $3,000 and below market. So this would be any photographer that is charging $3,000 for a wedding and below. So you got $2,500 in there, you got $2,000 in there, you got $1,500, you got $1,000 in there, you got $500 for a wedding. I don't know if people go down that far, but that entire group, I want to talk about the type of client who is booking at that price point, 3,000 and below. Okay. This client, hear me out, is so concerned about budget. It is budget, budget, budget. Budget is like first, second, and third thing on their list of priorities. Truly, in many cases, quality is most likely not an important part of the puzzle to this client. And if they think it is, it probably isn't. It really probably isn't. They may say it is. I'm telling you right now, I guarantee you it is not a huge important piece to the puzzle for this person, and or they fundamentally do not have the funds to make it an important piece of the puzzle. Because that's fine. Like someone may have amazing taste, but they may just be like, hey, listen, I do have amazing taste. I'd love to book like a $5,000, $10,000 photographer. I just don't have the money. And I have to make budget the priority. So either way you slice it, budget is still the number one thing on this person's list. Okay. And this is hard because you oftentimes, as a photographer in this price point, are oftentimes looked at as a commodity and you're compared as such. And it's kind of like a race to the bottom in that way, in that the lowest price point oftentimes just wins. And that's why I say it's a race to the bottom. It's like if you're charging 3,000, for example, and the other person's charging 2,000, they win almost every time. And that's what makes it so hard to succeed in that type of a space. Not to mention that you're kind of playing the volume game of like, I have to stack up like 40 weddings per year in order to make what I want to make, right? And this is why I encourage a lot of photographers to, as soon as they're done with that kind of like beginner photographer range, I really encourage them to get out of this $3,000 photographer and below range, because I don't think it's a great place to park for the rest of your career. Of course, if you want to stay there when you first begin as a photographer, I started there. Like I had to start. I think my first wedding was like $5,000. Excuse me, 500. Woo! It was like $500. And then my next wedding was probably something like 1,500, 2,000. So we all start somewhere. There's no shame in that. But I wouldn't park there. I wouldn't stay there. I wouldn't have that be your goal. The second zone of photography clients that I want to talk about is the clients that are booking within that $4,000 to about $6,000 market. So right in the middle there is like that $5,000 photographer. Okay. And this is the price point where we're not sub 3,000 anymore. We're not 3,000 and below. So people start caring a little bit more about quality in this point, and they have some money to back that up, which is good. But price is still very important to these people. you are still going to get slightly compared at this price point. You're still going to get people saying the other guy or the other gal might be cheaper. And so therefore we might have to go with that person, right? You're still going to get some outliers like that. It might even be a half and half situation where half of the people might, they might pick based on price. The other half might pick on quality. It's kind of like it's a catch 22. There's two different sides of that coin. But you start getting more into the spot where, okay, people start caring about quality a little bit more. And I think a lot of photographers live in that $4,000 to $6,000 market. That might even be where maybe quote unquote most photographers are in many senses. So it's not a bad place to be in. We're just kind of discussing different facets of these different sections. Okay. Now, the third one I want to talk about is the, let's say, $7,000 to $10,000 market. Okay. And this third, I'd say, main sector, main zone, this is where quality becomes a driving factor of a client's decision. Personality of the photographer, like the client's, how much the client connects with the personality of the photographer, I also think becomes a big driving factor as well, because people at that price point, they want to not just pay for like, oh, decent photos. They want to pay for some experience with the type of person that is at a premium price point. And I think another thing too is that price is significantly less important to this person who's at that $7,000 to $10,000 price point, because they have the money to make a decision based on quality rather than just the lowest price, right? If they're paying $7,000 to $10,000, they got some money. And so you can get a really good photographer at the $7,000 to $10,000 price point. They don't have to sacrifice quality in many senses once you get to this price point. And I think we all kind of can see that in the industry. So those, I would say, are the main three different zones that I see in the photography space. You've got the sub 3 budget. You got the $4,000 to $6,000 market. And that type of market's kind of like that middle zone where people start caring about quality, but some people still also care a lot about budget. It's kind of a mixed bag. And the third main zone is the $7,000 to $10,000 market, where quality really becomes that driving factor. Personality is key. Price is significantly less important to those type of people. And so you can kind of ask a little bit more as a photographer what you want and get a better client as well. Now, the fourth and maybe bonus one that I'll talk about, but I actually don't think it applies to tons and tons of photographers, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it, is the 10,000 plus market. Now, the 10,000 plus market, people who are above 10,000, spending above $10,000, like they're spending 5 figures on their wedding, photographer alone. These clients just flat out have got money. They've got money, okay? They care so much about quality that it's almost a non-negotiable. In that price point, when you're that high, it becomes much more about things like convenience. Like, how easy can you make this process for me? It's about convenience. It's about flexibility. It's about speed. It's about top-notch quality and experience level. And it's also about referrals. Like, mess ups are just so much less tolerated in the $10,000 plus range. And security as it is at an all-time high up there. Like, people just want to know, I want to write the check. And I want, like, if they're paying $15,000 for a wedding photographer, they're like, I just want to write the check and I don't want to have to worry about a dang thing. Okay. Planners are often a huge part of the people who are booking up there. So, anyways, what I want you to kind of see in all these price points is, yes, there is a specific type of person that's going to book in each of these different price zones. That doesn't mean you have to perfectly be in the smack dab in the center of one in order to book a lot of clients. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. All I'm trying to get to here is that I do think there are some zones of photography, and just be aware of what zone you're trying to position yourself in, what you're trying to accomplish, what type of clients you're trying to bring in, what your pricing says about you and your work. And there's also this idea that there's really an important factor about the top 2 tiers about the photography pricing. The one which would be especially $7,000 to $10,000, maybe even the 6 to 10. If I could go down one step, 6,000 to 10,000. Okay. And then the 10,000 and above. In those 2 tiers, You have this idea where some of you probably heard this phrase, the rich are richer and the poor are poorer, or the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So that saying basically means if someone's rich, they aren't just slightly richer, they are incredibly more wealthy. Okay. And so back what I was saying about that $10 entree for the $50,000 income earning person versus the $100 entree for the $500,000 income earning individual. It's the same concept here. And it's basically that the people that are paying you those top tier prices, they are just in a whole different world than the people who are paying in those bottom tier zones. Okay. Example for how this would play out with a photography pricing. So let's say if you got a client who books in a photographer for a $5,000 wedding. Okay. So it's kind of in that second tier, that second zone of clients that we talked about. Likely, not always, but very likely, if someone's spending about $5,000 on their wedding photographer, that's oftentimes like the top of their budget, maybe six. That's like the tippy top of a lot of people's budget. And so add ons and upsells, they're not impossible, but they're harder. Or like stretching your price point to get someone who has like a budget of 5,000 to pay you maybe for a top tier package of 7,000. That can be a little bit tricky sometimes because that person is probably already at the tippy top of their budget in many senses. Now, that's not always the case. So I don't want you to be held back psychologically from ever, like, if you're at $5,000, I don't want you to think I could never book someone at $7,000. No, you could. You could. I'm just saying sometimes it might be a little bit tougher of a jump. There might be a little less flex there for that person. They might be already maxing out, right? Now, when you get into the zones of like a client booking a photographer for 7,500, so you got 7,000 plus, getting that same client who is already agreed to a $7,500 wedding photography contract, getting that client to spend a little bit more to $8,500 is really not that hard. Let's say, same thing, someone's booking for $10,000 initially, that's like their initial budget, and the photographer wants to sell them all the way up to $12,000. Oftentimes, guys, it's even easier. Here's why. Because the person who has that type of money, they just oftentimes have a lot more of that type of money. Whereas the person who has little money, oftentimes they're already maxed out. They don't really have more to go around. Okay. So basically, the ratio of wedding photography budget to their yearly salary is just far wider than the person who maybe is doing the booking for $5,000. It just is. I hope this is like landing because it's kind of like abstract in the way that I'm describing it. But again, it's this idea that the rich or the wealthy, the people in those top zones of photography who have quite a bit of money to begin with, they're not just proportionally wealthier, they are disproportionately wealthier oftentimes. And this is not me telling you to be greedy and be like, ooh, then if they have that much money, I need to get more money out of them. It's more just to inform you that sometimes, let's say if you are in that top tier, let's say you're already charging $7,500 for a wedding, I would be very ready to give people an option where they can spend more with you because not just for your sake, but for their sake, they may actually desire to spend more money on their photography than you're offering. Okay. They may be like, I want the extras. I want the bells and whistles. You might not, like you personally might not be that person who wants the bells and whistles. Maybe you grew up in like a super frugal household. That's what I grew up in, where it's like, hey, bells and whistles are like, let's just do the basics. I'm telling you, though, that is not how the wealthy think. The wealthy want the bells and whistles. They want the extra cream and the extra sprinkles on the top of the sundae. They're not wanting to cheap out because they've got the money. They've earned that money and they're like, I'm here for a reason. I want to spend this money. And sometimes they even want to flaunt it a little bit. Okay. So I think sometimes we have to think in terms of, okay, how do I give people an opportunity If they would like to spend more money on this booking, if they want more of those extras, how do I give them opportunity to do that with me? Okay. And then not only that, but how can I put my pricing at such a price point that solidifies the quality for them? Because if they are thinking to themselves, a photographer that I'm booking should be $7,000, for example, and you're over here and you're like, well, I only think I'm worth $5,000. You might have served that person who wants a $7,000 photographer beautifully. But if you never put your prices up to that point, that $7,000 client will not want you at $5,000. They'll be like, that seems cheap. That seems risky. Something seems like it must be wrong with that photographer, or else they would be at the price point that I expected them to be. Okay. So again, I just want to make you think a little bit more about these money psychology and pricing psychology points so that you're not just caught in a price is a price. Now, I could go into this further. Again, we talk about so much of this stuff in my coaching program, but I want to keep moving here. And I want to, the last part of this episode I want to tackle is the dead zone. Is there a dead zone of a photographer's pricing? Well, I'm going to tell you this. If there was a dead zone of photographer's pricing, here's what it, or they in this case, would be. First type of dead zone I see, it would be kind of the industry-wide dead zone, like the obvious one, which is you got $3,000 and below, which we talked about, that zone of photographers where it's budget friendly only. And then you got maybe the $4,000 photographer to $6,000 photographer, and the client's booking the $4,000 to $6,000 photographer. They want something more like quality. I'd say sometimes if you're in that 3,000 to 4,000, maybe even sub 5,000 range, that could be a conceivable dead zone of photography because you're still so close to that budget client, but yet you're a little bit too expensive for them and you get beat by all the cheapos. On the flip side, you are still a little bit too cheap for the quality focused client who maybe wants the $5,000 to $6,000 photographer, that you seem a little risky for that client. So then you get caught in the middle of like, well, I'm not really sticking with either client. I don't want you to get too caught up on this though, because I think there is a place for this price point in the photography industry. I do think there are real life clients who would be perfect pairings for someone in that price point. But I'm just saying, if there was a dead zone, I would probably guess, as I've seen in my experience, that it would maybe be somewhere around there. So if you feel like you're in that dead zone, maybe do a little bit of audit of who am I trying to target here? Does that maybe $4,500 price point right smack and dab in the middle of that? Is that turning people away on both fronts? Now, dead zone type of 2 that I'd give you. This is a little bit less industry wide, but more unique to your business. And an example of this would be when you look like a $4,000 photographer, but you charge $7,000. That could be your own, not industry wide, but your own dead zone of photography pricing. On the flip side, it could be when you look like a $7,000 photographer, but you charge $4,000. And I'm telling you right now, I've seen both. As I've coached so many photographers over the years, I've seen both. Both of those type of people are blind. Both of those positions are bad places to be in. You know, I've been on coaching calls with my students in my program, and I'll say to one person, I'll say, hey, listen, you're charging $6,000, but your website looks like you spent like $1,000 to do it and you DIY'd it. That doesn't work. It's a mixed match. Or maybe it's the opposite, and it's like, hey, to another person, you're charging $5,000, but your work and your brand and your experience level is more like the $7,000 to $10,000 range. Like, wake up, smell the coffee. You are worth so much more than this. And so in that way, a photographer can have their own individual dead zone in the industry of pricing. Why? You might think. You're like, well, okay, well, if someone's like, $3,000 value, but they're charging $6,000, like we all get why that person doesn't really book. But you might be like, but Nate, underpricing doesn't seem like that would ever be a problem. Wouldn't all the clients just want the cheap photographer who has a really good quality? Like, doesn't that always attract people? I don't know about that. Now, let me give you an example of why to combat that philosophy in a different market. Let's talk about this. Let's go back to that Cartier watch for $10,000. Let's say that you want that Cartier watch for $10,000. You've been saving up for it. You hit that goal that you hit. This is going to be your reward to get it. You're ready. You want the real thing. You look up on Google Cartier watch and you're about to buy it. And all these different listings come up for where to buy a Cartier watch from. One of them is for $10,000. That's what you expected. One of them is for $3,000. One of them is even for $149.99 for a Cartier watch. Now, let me ask you this. It's cheaper. Maybe it's the exact same watch, but it's cheaper, way cheaper. Like, that's a steal. Are you even going to click on that price, though? Are you going to even click on the listing that says $149.99 for a Cartier watch? I'm talking $149. That's it. No, you're not going to even click on that listing. You're going to think something's wrong with that listing. Something's wrong with that website, that dealer. That's a scam. Something's off. You'd immediately think there's something's wrong with that physical watch. I'm telling you right now, it's the same thing when you underprice your photography. It's psychological, it's emotional, it's multifaceted. So in that way, underpricing can be just as detrimental to you as overpricing yourself. Okay. So now, to answer the initial question, after we've talked about all of this, I want to answer the initial question. Is there a dead zone of photography pricing? Answer, no. I don't think there's officially a dead zone of photography pricing, but yes, there can be a dead zone of photography pricing in terms of your own individual pricing, who you're trying to attract versus the price that you have. And or if you feel like you're in that $3,000 to $4,000 range, $3,000 to $5,000 range, and you're really struggling because you're getting a lot of budget-friendly clients who don't want you, and you're not getting the nicer quality clients, and if you do, they think you're too cheap, that might also be a dead zone. So that's my answer for you. Very nuanced, but hopefully this expanded your understanding of money in a little bit of a way, as much as I could shove into a podcast. Now, if you found these conversations around money helpful and expanding and enlightening, we have conversations like this all the time in my coaching program, The Business Blueprint, and I love to help you. I would love to have you in that program so I can help you expand these conversations in your head, expand your mindset even more when it comes to money and pricing psychology. So thank you for being here. Like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and I will see you guys next time. Take care.